A death row inmate once requested to drink Jack Daniels with the prison warden. Another said, "I'll be back," like the mothership in the movie Independence Day. Since 1976, more than 100 people have been executed in Florida. Before their deaths, each was allowed to choose a last meal and say a final word to the world. Some chose steak. Others chose mint ice cream. Some apologized, while others made threats. And some chose silence. In this video, you will hear the final confessions of those who once spread death. Stay tuned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any thrilling stories. Now, let's begin the journey into the darker side of justice. 1. Mark James Acey, Florida. On July 18, 1987, Mark James Acey committed 2 racially motivated murders in Jacksonville, Florida. The first victim, Robert Lee Booker, 34 years old, an African American, was shot by Acey after a dispute over racial issues. The second victim, Robert McDowell, 26 years old, of mixed white and Hispanic descent, was shot after the two had arranged for sexual services. After being sentenced to death in 1989, Acey spent over 3 decades on death row, enduring numerous appeals and delays. Finally, on August 24, 2017, he faced his unavoidable fate. The method of execution was lethal injection. Acey's last meal consisted of fried pork, fried ham, French fries, vanilla swirl ice cream, and a can of Coca-Cola. When asked for his last words, Acey coldly replied, "No, sir, I do not. Thank you." A brief, yet chilling statement, void of any remorse. 2. Gary Ray Bowles, Florida. Gary Ray Bowles, a notorious serial killer, terrorized the I-95 corridor throughout 1994. 6 men became his victims, most of whom were gay men Bowles met along the highway. Throughout his killing spree, Bowles often used violence to overpower his victims before robbing them, leaving behind a trail of grisly murders from Florida to Maryland. Before becoming a killer, Bowles had endured years of abuse and sexual assault, which is believed to have deeply affected his mental state and behavior. However, nothing can excuse the brutal actions he took. After many years of appeals and legal battles, on August 22, 2019, Gary Ray Bowles was executed by lethal injection. His last meal included 3 cheeseburgers, French fries, and bacon, an otherwise simple meal, but one full of irony, considering he had stolen the lives of so many people in just moments. Bowles offered no words at the execution chamber. Instead, he wrote a letter of apology to the victims' families. "I am sorry for all the pain and suffering I've caused. I hope my death will ease your pain." He also expressed regret to his mother. "Facing the fact that your son is called a monster is truly awful. I am very sorry." And finally, he bitterly admitted, "I never wanted my life to turn out this way." You can't wake up one day and decide to become a serial killer. 3. Oscar Ray Bolin Jr., Florida. Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. is a notorious criminal who was convicted for the abduction and murder of 3 women in Tampa, Florida, in 1986. These murders went unsolved until Bolin's new wife overheard him confessing to the crimes. She then asked Bolin's ex-husband to report the matter to the police, which led to an investigation lasting nearly 4 years. Ultimately, heartbreaking details of the atrocities Bolin had committed were revealed. Despite his continual claims of innocence and repeated appeals, Bolin faced his inevitable fate on January 7, 2016, after nearly 3 decades on death row. The method of execution was lethal injection, a common practice in Florida. Bolin's final meal consisted of a ribeye steak, baked potatoes, a salad, garlic bread, lemon meringue pie, and a Coca-Cola. Simple, yet complete, reflecting the mundane life he led before it ended in brutal finality. When asked for his last words, Bolin declined to speak. He continued to assert his innocence, and his brief response was, "No, sir." A cold refusal, devoid of remorse or regret, marking the end of his criminal life. 4. Judy Benoano, Florida. Judy Benoano, known as the Black Widow, committed a series of brutal murders to collect life insurance money. Her victims included her first husband, James Goodyear, who she poisoned with arsenic in 1971, her boyfriend Bobby Joe Morris, who also died from arsenic poisoning in 1978, her son Michael Goodyear, who died from arsenic poisoning in 1980, her boyfriend John Gentry, whom she tried to kill with a car bomb in 1983, but failed, and Gerald Dossett, another boyfriend, who was suspected of being poisoned with arsenic in 1980, though there was no evidence to convict. She meticulously planned these murders over time to profit from the life insurance policies she had signed. After the murders were uncovered, Judy Benoano was sentenced to death in 1998, following years of delayed trials. Her execution took place on March 30, 1998, and she was executed by the electric chair. Her final meal request included boiled spinach, vegetable soup, Brussels sprouts, cherry tomatoes, strawberries, and hot tea with lemon, a simple yet complete meal, reflecting the cold and complex mindset of a killer who plotted the deaths of her loved ones for personal gain. When asked for her final words, she responded briefly and coldly, "No, sir." A statement devoid of emotion or remorse, simply a punctuation mark to a life full of crime, with no apology. 5. Ted Bundy, Florida. Ted Bundy was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, with a brutal killing spree that lasted from 1974 to 1978. He kidnapped, raped, and murdered dozens of women and young girls across multiple states, including Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. Though Bundy confessed to killing 30 people, investigators suspected the actual number could be even higher. With his cold demeanor, sophisticated tactics, and ability to deceive others, Bundy became a nightmare that haunted America during the unsettling years of the 70s and 80s. After a series of murders, Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death. On January 24, 1989, after over a decade on death row, Ted Bundy faced his inevitable fate. The method of execution for Bundy was the electric chair, a brutal method but one that was familiar to Florida's legal system. Bundy's last meal had no special requests. He was provided with a standard prison meal consisting of a medium-rare steak, scrambled eggs, fries, toast with butter and jelly, milk, and fruit juice. A simple meal, nothing extraordinary, much like the indifference and cruelty of this killer. When asked if he had any final words, Bundy requested to send his love to his family and friends. "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." Those last words were simple and soft but served as a quiet farewell, echoing the silence of the death that was soon to come. 6. Edward Castro, Florida. Edward Castro, a serial killer from California, committed 3 murders in Central Florida between 1986 and 1987. A homeless man, Castro lived a transient life, and throughout his criminal spree, he attacked and killed innocent men. The first murder occurred on October 25, 1986, when Castro killed 46-year-old Claude J. Henderson in Auburndale, Florida. Castro bound and beat the victim before taking his van keys and leaving. The second victim was 50-year-old George Larry Hill, an interior designer, who was killed at his home on January 5, 1987. After killing Hill, Castro scrawled racist messages on the walls before fleeing. The third victim was 57-year-old Austin Carter Scott, who was murdered in his apartment on January 14, 1987. After killing Scott, Castro stole the victim's belongings and car. On December 7, 2000, after more than a decade on death row, Edward Castro was executed by lethal injection. His last meal consisted of steak, shrimp, ice cream, and soda. Nothing particularly special, yet reflecting the indifference of a killer in the face of his approaching end. However, there is no specific information about Castro's last words. In his final moments, he likely had nothing to say, leaving behind a silent farewell for a man who committed such brutal crimes. 7. Lauren Kinsley Cole, Florida. On February 18, 1994, at the Ocala National Forest in Florida, John Timothy Edwards and Pam Edwards were attacked by 2 men while camping. John Edwards, 18 years old, was brutally murdered with a knife. Pam Edwards, 21 years old, a student at Eckerd College, was not only raped but also forced to witness the death of her boyfriend. This horrific crime shocked Florida. After committing the crime, Cole and his accomplice fled but were eventually caught. Lauren Kinsley Cole, one of the two suspects, was sentenced to death and faced his final judgment. After many years on death row, on August 29, 2024, Lauren Kinsley Cole was executed by lethal injection, a common method of execution in Florida. His last meal consisted of pizza, M&Ms, ice cream, and soda, a simple meal, but symbolic of the end of a life filled with crime. When asked for any final words, Cole answered coldly and briefly, "No, sir." A response without remorse, without apology, only the silence before death drew near. 8. Alan Lee Davis, Florida. On May 11, 1982, Alan Lee Davis committed a brutal crime in Jacksonville, Florida, resulting in the deaths of 3 members of the Weiler family. Nancy Weiler, a 3-month pregnant mother, along with her 2 young daughters, 9-year-old Christina and 5-year-old Catherine, were murdered by Davis. The case sent shockwaves through the community, particularly due to the cruelty and inhumanity of Davis's actions. After being apprehended and convicted, Davis spent many years waiting for his execution, undergoing numerous legal procedures. Finally, on July 8, 1999, Davis was executed by electric chair, a traditional method of execution in Florida at the time, known as Old Sparky. Before facing death, Davis requested a last meal consisting of a lobster tail, French fries, half a pound of fried shrimp, 6 ounces of fried clams, half a loaf of garlic bread, and 32 ounces of A&W root beer. It was a simple yet complete meal, marking the closure of his life. Despite his impending death, there is no specific information about Davis's final words. However, like many other death row inmates, he did not show remorse or express any regret before paying the price for his crimes. A cold silence became his final farewell, reflecting the nature of the killer he had been. 9. Ángel Nieves Diaz, Florida. Ángel Nieves Diaz, born on August 31, 1951, in Puerto Rico, was a dangerous criminal who committed a series of serious offenses throughout his criminal career. In 1978, Diaz killed the director of a rehabilitation center by stabbing him 19 times while the victim was asleep. A year later, after escaping from prison in Puerto Rico, Diaz and an accomplice robbed Velvet Swing Lounge, a strip club in Florida, resulting in the death of Joseph Nagy, the club's manager. These crimes led to Diaz being convicted and sentenced to death in 1986. On December 13, 2006, after over 20 years on death row, Ángel Nieves Diaz faced his final judgment. The method of execution was lethal injection. Before his execution, Diaz did not request a special last meal and was only served the standard prison meal, which included shredded chicken with taco seasoning, grated cheese, rice, pinto beans, tortillas, apple pie, and iced tea. However, he refused to eat. Before his death, Diaz stated, "The state of Florida is killing an innocent man. The state of Florida is committing a crime because I am innocent. The death penalty is not just revenge, it is a cowardly act by man. I am sorry for what is happening to me and my family." Despite Diaz's claims of innocence, his execution process was far from smooth. It took about 34 minutes, much longer than the average time, due to technical issues during the injection. An investigation later revealed that there was a mistake in placing the needle, causing the drugs not to be injected directly into the vein, resulting in delays in carrying out the execution. 10. James Dennis Ford, Florida. James Dennis Ford's case began on April 6, 1997, when Ford invited Gregory Philip Malnory, 25 years old, and Kimberly Ann Malnory, 26 years old, to the South Florida sod farm in Charlotte County, Florida, under the pretense of fishing. However, at the farm, Ford attacked the couple savagely. Gregory Malnory was shot in the head, then bludgeoned and slit his throat, while Kimberly Malnory was beaten, raped, and then shot dead. Their daughter, Miranda, who was only 22 months old, was left alone in the family's truck for over 18 hours, surviving but severely dehydrated and bitten by insects. James Dennis Ford was arrested and sentenced to death. On February 13, 2025, after nearly 3 decades on death row, Ford will face his final judgment. The method of execution will be lethal injection. Ford did not request a special last meal and was served the standard prison meal. He did not make a final statement before his execution. 11. Louis Gaskin, Florida. On December 20, 1989, Louis Gaskin, also known as the Ninja Killer, committed 2 murders and an attempted murder in Palm Coast, Florida. Gaskin dressed in black ninja attire and carried a .22 rifle to attack his victims. He killed Robert and Georgette Sternfels, a couple from New Jersey, while they were in their own home. Later, Gaskin attempted to kill Joseph and Mary Rector, but fortunately, they survived. Gaskin was apprehended and sentenced for these crimes. On April 12, 2023, after many years on death row, Louis Gaskin was executed by lethal injection. His last meal consisted of barbecue pork ribs, buffalo chicken wings, chicken necks and turkey, shrimp fried rice, French fries, and a drink. A substantial meal, but it could not erase the cruelty of Gaskin's actions. When asked for his final words, Gaskin responded, "Justice is not about the crime. It's not about the criminal. It's about the law." 12. Arthur Frederick Goode III, Virginia. Arthur Frederick Goode III, born March 28, 1954, was a sex offender and murderer. In March of 1976, after escaping from a psychiatric facility in Baltimore, Goode committed a series of kidnappings and brutal murders. Jason Verdow, 9 years old, was Goode's first victim. The boy was lured into the woods where Goode abused and strangled him to death. Kenneth Dawson, 11 years old, and Billy Arths were the next victims. Goode abducted both boys, but only Kenneth Dawson was murdered in Falls Church, Virginia. After his horrific actions were exposed, Goode was arrested and sentenced to death. On April 5, 1984, Goode was executed in the electric chair. Goode's last meal consisted of a steak, corn, broccoli, and biscuits, a relatively simple but complete meal. Before his execution, Goode said, "I regret the 2 boys I killed. But it's hard for me to show that." His final words reflected regret, though his emotional expression was limited. 13. David Allen Gore, Florida. David Allen Gore, along with his cousin Fred Waterfield, carried out a series of murders in Vero Beach and Indian River County, Florida, between 1981 and 1983. They became known as the cousins who killed due to their family connection and the nature of their crimes. Gore and Waterfield are believed to be responsible for at least 5 brutal murders, targeting young, mostly African American women. Their victims included Xian Huang Ling, 48 years old, and Yinghua Ling, 17 years old, mother and daughter, kidnapped and murdered on February 19, 1981. Judith K. Daly, 35 years old, killed on July 15, 1981. Barbara Ann Byer, 14 years old, and Angelica LaValle, 14 years old, murdered on May 20, 1983. Lynn Elliott, 17 years old, and Reagan Martin, 14 years old, killed on July 26, 1983. After committing these horrific crimes, Gore and Waterfield were caught and sentenced to death. On April 12, 2012, David Allen Gore was executed by lethal injection. Gore's last meal consisted of fried chicken, French fries, and peach ice cream, a simple meal, but one that marked the end of his criminal life. Before his execution, Gore apologized to the victims' families and expressed regret for his actions. This late remorse, though, still showed some acknowledgement of his crimes. 14. Thomas Otis Knight, Florida. Thomas Otis Knight was a brutal criminal. On July 17, 1974, Knight kidnapped Sidney and Lillian Gans in Miami, Florida, forcing them to withdraw $50,000 from a bank. During this process, he killed both of them. This murder was just one in a series of violent crimes Knight committed. After his arrest, Knight escaped from prison with 10 other inmates. During this time, he also killed a store employee in a robbery, adding to his list of crimes. On January 7, 2014, after years of imprisonment and appeals, Thomas Otis Knight faced his final judgment. The method of execution: lethal injection. Knight's last meal included sweet potato pie, coconut pie, banana nut bread, a quarter of a bottle of Sprite, 2 spoonfuls of strawberries, peach ice cream, vanilla ice cream, and Fritos. It was a lavish meal, but could it ease the guilt in the mind of a murderer? When asked for his final words, Knight refused to speak. This odd silence, without remorse or apology, was his final farewell to life. 15. Bobby Joe Long, Florida. Bobby Joe Long, born October 14, 1953, in Canova, West Virginia, was a notorious serial killer and rapist. In 1984, within an 8-month period, he kidnapped, raped, and murdered at least 10 women in the Tampa Bay area of Florida. Before committing these murders, Long had already carried out dozens of rapes, becoming known as the classified ad rapist due to his method of luring victims through personal ads. After his arrest, Long was sentenced to death and became one of the most infamous serial killers in Florida. On May 23, 2019, Bobby Joe Long faced his execution. Long's last meal consisted of grilled beef, bacon, French fries, and soda, a simple meal that couldn't undo the horror he had caused. When asked for his final words, Long declined to speak before his execution. One of Long's victims, Lisa McVeigh, survived and provided crucial information that helped police catch him. Her story was later adapted into the TV movie Captured, the true story of the kidnapping of Lisa McVeigh. 16. Danny Rolling, Florida. Danny Rolling, born May 26, 1954, in Shreveport, Louisiana, was dubbed the Gainesville Ripper. In August of 1990, within just 4 days, Rolling killed 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida. These brutal actions shook the community to its core, becoming one of the most chilling serial killing sprees in U.S. history. After being caught, he was sentenced to death in 1994. On October 25, 2006, Danny Rolling was executed by lethal injection. Rolling's last meal consisted of lobster tail, fried shrimp, baked potatoes, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea, a hearty meal that could not erase the pain and guilt he caused. His final words were delivered as he repeatedly sang a song, stating, "None greater than thee, O Lord." This was a repeated prayer from a killer, perhaps meant to face the death he had caused after inflicting so much suffering. Danny Rolling's actions have inspired the horror movie Scream, one of the most famous works in the slasher genre. 17. Manuel Pardo, Florida. Manuel Manny Pardo Jr., born September 24, 1956, was a serial killer and former police officer in Florida. Between January and April of 1986, he committed a series of murders, totaling 9 victims, including friends, colleagues, and individuals involved in robberies and drug disputes. Pardo's actions stunned the public, especially when it was revealed that he had been a police officer. He justified his murders as acts of justice and showed no remorse. After being arrested in May of 1986, Manuel Pardo was sentenced to death and faced his final judgment. On December 11, 2012, after more than 2 decades on death row, he was executed by lethal injection. Pardo's last meal was quite lavish, consisting of rice, red beans, roasted pork, bananas, butter, tomatoes, olive oil, pumpkin pie, scrambled eggs, and Cuban coffee. This meal, though rich, reflected some connection to his cultural background. Before his execution, Pardo's final words were, "Airborne forever. I love you, Michi baby," referring to his beloved daughter, Michi. A heartfelt farewell to his family in his last moments. 18. Thomas Harrison Provenzano, Florida. Thomas Harrison Provenzano, born 1960, was a man with a criminal past. On January 10, 1984, Provenzano, a 34-year-old unemployed electrician, stormed the Orange County Courthouse in Orlando, Florida, armed with a rifle, submachine gun, pistol, and numerous rounds of ammunition. Initially, Provenzano intended to shoot the officers who had arrested him earlier for disturbing the peace, but instead, he killed Deputy Sheriff William Arnold Arnie Wilkerson, 60 years old, and wounded Deputy Sheriff Harry Dalton, 53 years old, who later died from his injuries. A prison guard, Mark Parker, 19 years old, was also injured and left paralyzed from the neck down. These criminal acts led to Provenzano being sentenced to death. On June 21, 2000, he was executed by lethal injection. For his last meal, Provenzano requested half a grilled cheese sandwich, half a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, baked beans, hot canned apples, 2 slices of bread, and tea. A simple but complete meal, symbolizing a final closure for his life. Before his execution, Provenzano's final words were a heartfelt apology and farewell. "I just want to say to my family, I love you and I'll see you in heaven. I am sorry for the pain I caused. Goodbye." 19. Mark Dean Schwab, Florida. Mark Dean Schwab, a convicted sex offender, committed a heinous crime on April 18, 1991. He kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered an 11-year-old boy, Juni Rios Martinez Jr., in Florida. After committing the crime, Schwab fled to Ohio but was later apprehended and extradited back to Florida for trial. Schwab had a criminal history, including prior sex offenses, which made his actions even more appalling. After being tried and convicted, Schwab became one of the most notorious death row inmates due to the severity of his crime. On July 1, 2008, Schwab was executed by lethal injection. His last meal consisted of scrambled eggs, bacon, sausage, French fries, buttered toast, and a liter of chocolate milk. A simple meal, yet one that could not erase the brutality of the crimes he committed. When asked for his final words, Schwab chose to remain silent, offering no statement in his last moments before the execution. Note: Schwab was the first inmate to be executed in Florida after executions had been paused due to an issue with the lethal injection process. 20. John Arthur Spenklink, Florida. John Arthur Spenklink was a convicted murderer who committed a brutal killing on February 4, 1973, in Tallahassee, Florida. After a heated argument, Spenklink shot Joseph J. Simankiewicz, then proceeded to attack him further with a hatchet, leading to his painful death. Spenklink claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Simankiewicz had stolen his money, forced him into playing Russian roulette, and assaulted him. Spenklink was arrested on February 9, 1973, in Buena Park, California, and was sentenced to death. On May 25, 1979, he became the first person to be executed in Florida after the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Execution method: electric chair at Florida State Prison, a method that became symbolic in Florida at the time. For his last meal, Spenklink requested a bottle of Jack Daniels, which he shared with the prison warden, a rare and personal request, reflecting his final farewell. His last words were, "I just want to say to my family, I love you and I'll see you in heaven. I am sorry for the pain I caused. Goodbye." 21. Gerald Eugene Stano, Florida. Gerald Eugene Stano, born September 12, 1951, in Schenectady, New York, was a notorious serial killer. Between 1969 and 1980, Stano killed at least 23 women and young girls, though he confessed to police that the actual number of victims could be as high as 88. His murders occurred primarily in Florida, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, making him one of the most feared serial killers. Stano typically targeted women and girls, committing brutal murders without remorse. After being arrested and tried, Stano was sentenced to death and faced his final judgment on March 23, 1998. He was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison. Stano's last meal was elaborate, consisting of Delmonico steak, baked potatoes with sour cream and bacon, Roquefort salad, lima beans with butter, half a gallon of mint chocolate chip ice cream, and a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. Before his execution, Stano stated, "I am innocent. I am scared. I was threatened and held for months without proper legal representation. I confessed to crimes I did not commit. His statement was bitter and defiant, trying to present himself as a victim of the legal system. 22. Robert Austin Sullivan, Florida. On April 8, 1973, Robert Austin Sullivan and his accomplice Reed McLaughlin kidnapped Donald Schmidt, the manager of Howard Johnson's restaurant, in Homestead, Florida. They tied Schmidt up, took him to the Everglades swamps, beat him with an iron rod, and shot him 4 times in the back of the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. After killing Schmidt, they stole his credit cards and watch. Although Sullivan was convicted of murder, his exact role in the crime has been a subject of controversy, as McLaughlin later confessed to being the one who shot Schmidt. On November 30, 1983, Sullivan was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison. His last meal consisted of steak, French fries, milk, and fresh strawberries, an ordinary meal that could not erase the pain he caused. Before his execution, Robert Austin Sullivan offered no final words. His silence reflected the coldness and lack of remorse before his impending death. 23. Jerry White, Florida. On March 8, 1981, Jerry White committed an armed robbery at Alexander's grocery store in Taft, Florida. During the robbery, he shot and wounded the store owner, Alex Alexander, and a customer, James A. Melson. Not stopping there, White continued to commit more robberies and violent acts in nearby areas, escalating the situation. After being arrested and tried, he was sentenced to death for his violent and life-threatening actions. On December 4, 1995, his sentence was carried out by electric chair, a common execution method in Florida at the time. Jerry White's last meal consisted of roast beef, French fries, coleslaw, toast, and orange juice, a simple meal before the end of his life. Before his execution, he made a statement, "I hope that everyone who can hear my voice will turn to Jesus Christ, as I have." He also left a handwritten final note stating, "I have confessed all my sins before God, my Lord. I want to express my sorrow to all the people I have hurt." His final words were a late repentance, filled with religious sentiment, directed to his family, society, and God. 24. Aileen Wuornos, Florida. Aileen Wuornos, born February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, is one of America's most infamous female serial killers. Between late 1989 and late 1990, while working as a prostitute along Florida's highways, Wuornos shot and killed 7 men, customers she claimed had either attempted to rape or had raped her. Wuornos argued that the murders were acts of self-defense, but her testimony was controversial and did not convince the court. Ultimately, she was sentenced to death. On October 9, 2002, her sentence was carried out by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Before her execution, Wuornos declined a special last meal. Instead, she had a hamburger and some snacks from the prison canteen, finishing with a cup of hot coffee. This simple last meal marked the end of a life filled with turmoil, from an unhappy childhood to a path of crime. In her final moments, Wuornos did not offer any apologies or pleas. Instead, she made a strange and mysterious statement. "Yes, I would just like to say I am sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th. Like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." This statement sounded like a bizarre prophecy, marking the end of one of America's most mysterious female serial killers. And those are the stories of death row inmates who paid the ultimate price for their crimes. Their final moments, their last words, all are just a small part of the criminal lives they led. Each life, each fate, has its own tragedy, but sometimes, justice must be served. If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of these cases? Is there true justice? Leave your answers and let's discuss. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video on Crimes Unearthed 911.